A nurse enters a dimly lit room with caution in the opening moments of the film. She uses the flash on her camera to search the surroundings when all of a sudden, a person attacks her. Then a deadly syringe is inserted into her eye, causing her body to violently convulse. The nurse eventually dies, and the murderer removes her body from the scene by dragging it. Dr. Rajay, who oversees a private hospital that exclusively treats comatose patients, is introduced to us in the following scenario. The director of the hospital, with whom he is currently visiting, inquires about the progress of his research. In response, Rajay says he's working on it, but the director threatens to withhold the investor's money if he doesn't deliver quickly. Kathy Jacquard, a nurse, comes to the hospital in the afternoon for a job interview. Cassidy, the head nurse, greets her and appears a little irritated. Not long after, Roger walks into the room and starts asking her a lot of medical questions. Because Kathy responds to each of them with assurance and precision, Roger decides to hire her. Following that, Kathy is given her uniform and is given a tour of the hospital by Paula, another nurse. Paula discloses that Cassidy is, in fact, Dr. Roger's daughter during this, even though they would rather keep their relationship a secret. She also says that nobody knows why the former nurse who worked with Kathy vanished overnight. As the patients proceed down the hallway, Paula then introduces Kathy to each of them. They quickly reach room 15, where Patrick, a young man, has been unconscious for years. Paula tells him that Dr. Rajay is observing him closely and is working on an experiment of some kind. In contrast to the other patients, Patrick seemed to be doing fairly well. When Kathy comes over to say hello, he spits in her face. She is intrigued. Thankfully, there is no need for concern, as it appears to be an involuntary muscular reflex. Later, Kathy hears an odd alarm sound while working alone to sweep the floor. She is startled to find a man with a disfigured face when she turns around. When Paula shows up and identifies the man as Mr. Fraser, one of their patients, Kathy starts to lose her cool. Fraser was hurt in an explosion, but it turns out that Dr. Rajay helped him come out of a coma. Next, Paula shows Kathy Fraser's room, which is adorned with clocks. She reveals that the man works at a nearby lighthouse every day at 7 p.m. Later on in the evening, Kathy receives a call from her former partner, Ed, when she is in her room browsing Facebook. But she dismisses it with icy coldness, even erasing his phone number. At that moment, Paula knocks on the door, wanting to go outside. When Kathy says yes, they go to a pub to have a drink. There, Paula introduces her to Brian, a psychiatrist by trade who spends much of his time writing and presenting a radio program. He expresses interest in Kathy, and she begins to feel drawn to him as well. The following day, Roger shows Kathy to room 15, but not before cautioning her against speaking with Patrick. The moment they're inside, the doctor begins doing experiments, injecting Patrick and poking him multiple times on his body. When Roger looks at his brain activity, he finds no signal. He becomes so frustrated by this that he quickly gives up on the project and walks away. The action then shifts to the weekend, when Kathy meets Brian while visiting a neighboring museum. He gets a missed call from an unknown number while they are talking. For the time being, Brian ignores it and extends an invitation to coffee. She nods in agreement, but he answers by spitting on her out of the blue. Kathy runs off in an angry mood, finding this to be really nasty. Brian pays her a visit the following evening and expresses his regret for what transpired. He begs her pardon, acknowledging that he can't recall what he did. He apologizes, and although Kathy is still not happy with him, she accepts and welcomes him inside. A knock on the door interrupts their evening as they begin to drink and enjoy each other's company. Ed, Kathy's ex-husband, shows up with the intention of making apologies. She gives him a harsh telling off, saying she doesn't want to see him. Ed, though, provides his temporary address and insists he won't leave town until their problems are resolved. Kathy is in a bad mood after the encounter and requests that Brian go as well. But when he gets ready to go, his hands begin to shake violently. As a result, He unintentionally breaks a glass, seriously hurting his hand. After that, Kathy drives him to the hospital and gets him treated before heading back home. When Brian suddenly returns to her home late that night, they start to get personal. But just as their enjoyment is at its zenith, she sees something worrying. Brian's skin starts to wither like a mummy, and his face abruptly changes to resemble Patrick's. Kathy lets out a horrified cry and quickly realizes that it was all just a nightmare when she wakes up. When Jessica gets to work the following day, Dr. Roger is still doing his torturous tests on Patrick. When Kathy approaches the patient after he has left, he spits in her direction in response. She is furious about this and gives him a hard slap right away. However, she regrets her behavior and apologizes when Patrick begins to cry. He spits oddly once again, and Kathy notices that he's attempting to say something. Then she tells him to spit twice to indicate no and once to indicate yes. Following that, Kathy begins to touch different areas of his body and inquires as to whether he feels anything. In response, he spits. She quickly gets carried away and touches his intimate areas, inquiring as to whether he is able to feel her. Sadly, Cassidy witnesses her in action and calls her into her office. She is chastised by the chief nurse for attempting to speak with Patrick, and even for inappropriately touching him. When Kathy says he's conscious, Cassidy doesn't accept it and curses the patients, hoping they would pass away soon. Roger interrupts their argument and requests documentation supporting Kathy's assertion. The patient doesn't react this time when she walks him to Patrick and asks him to spit. This dissatisfies Dr. Roger, who maintains that an electrical charge from the medical equipment within his body was the real source of the spitting. Later on in the evening, we see Patrick's room computer coming on by itself. It is disclosed that he possesses telekinetic powers, which enable him to manipulate objects without making direct touch with them. Patrick glances at Kathy's photos as he begins to browse her social media accounts. He gets a wave of envy as he sees a picture of her with Ed. Kathy asks Patrick why he didn't respond in front of the doctor when she sees him by herself the next day. In response, he types the word secret into the adjacent computer using his telekinetic powers. Kathy is shocked by this, but Paula appears and the word on the display vanishes before she can react. When Kathy and Ed eventually get together in the evening, their relationship problems are finally resolved. After a protracted conversation, Ed goes to the kitchen to start cooking. He gets a missed call at this same moment from an unidentified number. Ed is forced to put his hand on a grill by Patrick, who takes control of him before he can identify who it is. When Kathy enters the kitchen a little while later, she is shocked to see that Ed has significant burns on his hand. After she gets him to the hospital, the physician notes that Ed was unable to feel the pain because of damage to his nerves. Kathy goes back to the facility and makes an effort to get in touch with Patrick in spite of the horrific catastrophe. She is shocked to see that he starts talking to her on the computer once more. He refuses to say yes when Kathy asks if he wants the doctor to stop torturing him. Patrick says that because she has always been good to him, that's why he only talks to her. Kathy tries to object when the doctor shows up later to put Patrick through yet another grueling experiment. The doctor instructs her to mind her own business despite her claims that the process is barbaric. Kathy meets with Brian in the evening and fills him in on all of the horrific experiments that Dr. Rajat has been carrying out. She also asserts that Patrick might not survive if they do not take immediate action. Brian is horrified to learn this and vows to discuss it with his fellow reporters in order to come up with a solution. The following day, Roger approaches Kathy, enraged at her for spreading false information about him. He discloses that Brian has been contacting him and posing several queries. She leaves, though, saying she doesn't know anything about this. Afterwards, she assures Patrick that Roger's trials will come to an end and that she will assist him. He replies, nevertheless, that he doesn't need her assistance and that he prefers things to remain as they are. Fraser turns on the lighthouse at that precise moment as the clock strikes 7. This lowers the voltage, which makes Patrick's typing unpredictable. On his way to the facility that evening to conduct an investigation, Brian makes an attempt to contact Kathy, but then his phone overheats, burning his car seat in the process. It appears that Patrick has gained access to both the automobile and his phone. When the accelerator pedal is depressed all the way to the floor, the brake pedal likewise gives way. Eventually, Brian loses control of the car and crashes over a cliff, dying as a result. Kathy has had enough, but Roji carries on with his experiments the following day. She takes over mid-procedure and takes out the electric shock gadget. Sadly, this results in Patrick's heart rate monitor being flat. Paula starts CPR on him right away, and Kathy gives him an adrenaline shot. After Patrick is eventually revived, Cassidy violently ejects the two nurses. She then goes up to her father and begs him to cease the tests. She thinks Patrick is going to end them all and enter their lives as a curse. The doctor replies, however, that he can't give up just yet since he's about to make a breakthrough. In the meantime, Kathy is incensed upon learning of Brian's passing. She confronts Roger right away and charges him with planning it. But the man instantly fires her since he doesn't know what she's talking about. The following day, Cassidy goes to Kathy's house with the intention of killing her after receiving a fatal injection. A flashback reveals that she was the one who killed the nurse at the beginning of the film. Cassidy tells Kathy not to come back to the clinic ever again when she arrives. She realizes that although she and her father have committed horrible crimes, Patrick is the true monster. After that, she gives Kathy a file about Patrick and cautions her that his love could be more harmful than his hate. Cassidy acknowledges that she came here to murder her today, but she is too exhausted to carry out the plan. Following her departure, Kathy delves deeply into the file and learns that Patrick was once completely enamored with his mother. He killed her and her lover by tossing a toast into the water after finding them in the bathtub one day. He then electrocuted himself by plunging his hands into the bathtub, which put him in a coma. Cassidy returns to the institution and takes her father to the home of a critically ill patient. In addition, she gives Paula instructions to go shopping for certain medical items. After everyone has left, Cassidy takes a pair of scissors and decides to kill Patrick. Sadly, though, he uses his abilities to make her give them up. Kathy discovers that Patrick's telekinetic skills pose a greater risk than she had anticipated while having a bath. She is aware that he bears some of the blame for Ed and Brian's experiences. She calls her partner right away out of concern and requests that he get out of town as quickly as possible. A message that reads, "You are mine," now shows up on her steamy mirror. Kathy becomes furious and yells at Patrick, referring to him as a helpless child. However, this just serves to enrage him, and he causes the mirror to blow apart, hurting her hands. Cassidy visits the facility's basement in another scene. She desires to turn off the electricity and the devices that sustain Patrick's life. She is shocked to learn that he can manipulate the wires around the room and instantly electrocutes her to death. Roger returns to the facility shortly after and searches for his daughter. However, Patrick locks him in the laboratory while he's doing it. Ed shows up next, and he's been concerned about Kathy because of her voicemail. Paula, who is now under Patrick's authority, is encountered by him. When Ed asks her about Kathy, she ignores him and turns to leave. In an attempt to locate his lover, Ed pursues her, but Paula traps him in a freezer. Soon after, Kathy finds that all of the patients have abruptly gotten up when she arrives at the facility. They start chanting, "Patrick wants a hand job," which both terrifies and weirded her out. Kathy comes across Paula, who is still under Patrick's influence, as she makes an attempt to flee. He guides her to the elevator door, which opens in an instant, sending her tumbling to the floor. Kathy feels a little relieved that Paula is not hurt. Her respite is short-lived, though, since Patrick releases the elevator and kills the nurse by crushing her. Following the incident, a shaken Kathy goes to room number 15, which she discovers is locked. Patrick then texts her to tell her that he loves her. Is this the same affection he felt for his mother? Kathy yells at him. However, he stays silent and merely informs her that Ed has been locked up somewhere. Kathy becomes quite concerned about this and frantically searches the institution for her partner, but she is unable to find him. She soon reaches the lab, where she witnesses Roger consuming live frogs. He says that he was compelled to do so by the insane patient. Then, without warning, Roger leaves the room, locking the door behind him and imprisoning Katie within. Subsequently, he seizes a deadly needle and endeavors to murder Patrick using it. But the latter uses his own electric shock device on the doctor and hurls him out of the room. Fraser is about to deliver the electric shock when he sees that Roger is hurt. But he quickly heads to the lighthouse as his alarm clock goes off. It's clear that his obsession with lighthouses comes above rescuing lives. Regretfully, the physician meets an agonizing demise. While everything is going on, Kathy escapes and finds Ed imprisoned in the freezer. She makes every effort to free him, but to no avail. The nurse who was killed at the beginning now awakens within the freezer. It comes out that the comatose weirdo is using her like a puppet. She then goes up to Ed and begins violently strangling him. Kathy is so terrified by this that she begs Patrick to save her partner. He replies by texting her, saying he will free her lover if she joins his side. The unfortunate woman hears this and is forced to comply with his requests. After giving her the fatal dose, Patrick makes her choose. He tells her that she has to let Ed die or inject herself and be with him. After giving it some thought, Kathy decides to end her own life. However, she also watches the time since she knows the lighthouse bulb will soon be turned on. She tries to strike up a conversation with Patrick in order to pass the time and tells him how much she loves him. Fraser flips on the lighthouse at 7 o'clock in the evening, which lowers the power voltage. Kathy then makes the most of the brief period of darkness by puncturing Patrick's heart with the syringe. The life force of the deceased nurse in the freezer diminishes as well. Ed is able to exhale and emerge from the freezer as a result. The two lovers then get back together and give each other heartfelt hugs. They witness Patrick's body being tossed out the window a short while later. It impales his heart when it lands on the fence in front of the door.